how it's been received in the UK. But before all of that, here's your latest news headlines with Ray.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11, our top story this hour. India's rail minister is blaming changes to the points and signalling system for the country's worst train crash in decades. Ashwini Vaishnaw made the claim during a visit to the site as recovery work and an investigation got underway. It's thought that 2 passenger trains collided when one derailed. Both then crashed into a goods train, killing 288 people.
We will try to restore this track today. All the wagons, coaches and bodies have been removed. The restoration operation is in full swing and we will try to finish the restoration work by Wednesday morning so that by then trains will be able to run normally.
The Immigration Minister has told GBNews it's wrong for migrants to demand better hotel accommodation while waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. It's after a protest was sparked in London by migrants being asked to sleep 4 to a room. Speaking to Camilla Tominey, Robert Jenrick said the government will never put their interests above the British public. He also said that sharing hotel rooms is necessary to get value for taxpayers' money.
Remember, these are migrants who have said they are destitute. They've said that they have absolutely nowhere to stay, no friends, no family, no money, and the taxpayer is stepping up and providing them with good quality accommodation and board and lodgings. And so, I think those migrants are wrong to protest and say that they deserve to have single bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I'm pleased to see that common sense seems to have prevailed in this case.
A man has been arrested on suspicion of a public order offence after wearing a shirt to the FA Cup final, which appeared to have an offensive reference to the Hillsborough disaster. It featured the number 97 and the words "not enough." 97 Liverpool fans died in 1989 at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield. The Prime Minister is stressing the importance of a close and candid relationship with the US President ahead of his visit to the White House next week. Rishi Sunak is expected to attend a baseball game in Washington, D.C., prior to talks with Joe Biden. He'll also be meeting business executives in an attempt to build closer economic ties between the two countries. More than 2,600 NHS staff in Scotland have taken time off work due to long COVID, with some off sick for more than 2 years. That's according to Freedom of Information requests by the Scottish Liberal Democrats. The Scottish Government says it's investing £10 million into the Long COVID Support Fund. The Duke of Sussex will appear at the High Court tomorrow to give evidence against the publisher of the Daily Mirror over alleged unlawful information gathering. Harry claims that around 140 published articles contained information gathered using unlawful methods, including phone hacking. Mirror Group Newspapers is contesting the claims. Royal correspondent Michael Cole says it will be very unusual to see a royal on the witness stand.
A royal prince going into the witness box to give evidence in a very contentious case against Mirror Group newspapers. That hasn't happened ever since the 19th century. It is unprecedented. I mean, there's nothing in the British Constitution that says a royal prince cannot give evidence or cannot be called to be a witness.
4 children have died and a man is missing in Canada after they were swept into a river in Quebec. Police say the group was fishing when the incident happened. The children, who were all over the age of 10, were found unresponsive on the shore. 6 other people have been rescued. And meteorologists say there is a small chance that the temperature could reach 26 Celsius today, which would make it the hottest day of the year so far. Now, it's likely to be warmest somewhere in the west of the country, along with parts of Wales and possibly southwest England. Meanwhile, the Met Office says that the dry weather is expected to continue into next week. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Dame Arlene.
And thanks to Ray as well. Welcome back. You're listening and watching Sunday Morning with Arlene Foster. And if you want to get in touch about any of the issues we're talking about today, please write into gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet us at gbnews. Now, it's been another busy week in politics, and let's hear the latest political news from our GB News political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, it seems to be all about tax at the moment, whether it's inheritance tax or cutting tax. Tell us about it.
It's all about tax today. The Telegraph's front page story, Telegraph, of course, have been running their scrap inheritance tax campaign, and their front page today is all about Rishi Sunak planning to cut either income tax or national insurance by 2p before the next election. Now, he believes that despite the stickiness of inflation, the fact that it's stuck around for far longer than we were expecting, the Bank of England said inflation would be transitory during COVID, and yet it is still here and still in double digits. Despite that, Rishi Sunak thinks that by April he will have some space in the budget to be able to cut taxes a bit. Now, of course, that would help people out with the cost of living crisis at home, and it would also help address some of the problems in his own party. There are plenty of Trussites in the party who feel that Rishi Sunak's very, very high tax burden on the public, the highest burden in 70 years, will cause people simply to turn away from the Conservatives at the next election. But, of course, there is a bit of a fly in the ointment for Rishi Sunak. Although there might be more money in the headroom for him to spend on this tax cut, he is also promising to address the NHS crisis, another issue which could make or break the next election for him. And to do that, plans are being discussed to put £1 billion cash injection into the NHS. That would mean doubling the number of doctors who are being trained between now and 2028, and introducing another 24,000 midwives and nurses. Obviously, that comes with a big price tag attached too. And it sounds as though there are arguments going on at the very top of Cabinet over whether to fully fund these plans over 15 years, i.e. whether to explain exactly where and how this money is going to come in for the full 15 years that the plan will be implemented, or whether simply to fund the plan in the very short term. Rishi Sunak is much more prepared to do that. He doesn't want to commit to investing so much money over the course of such a long period of time because he wants to stick to his tax cuts. But Steve Barclay and Jeremy Hunt are putting quite a lot of pressure on him. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how that plays out. Will Rishi Sunak be able to implement those tax cuts which he wants and which he has promised to his backbenchers, or will there simply be too much pressure to put money into the flailing NHS?
Tax and raising money and the NHS as well. But I've always thought when you're looking at training more doctors that we should be trying to make sure that those doctors and nurses stay in the UK and not go away. But maybe that's something we'll talk about again. Thanks, Olivia, and look forward to seeing you soon. Well, hundreds of people gathered outside Oxford Union this week to protest against the talk by gender-critical Professor Kathleen Stock. PM Rishi Sunak came out in support of Stock's right to speak at the Oxford Union, urging those who disagree with her to engage with her views rather than shut them down. One would have thought that at one of our premier universities that would be self-evident, but there you go. The talk went on for about 10 minutes before 3 protesters emerged from the audience of the packed hall, interrupting the events. I'm joined now by sketch writer Madeleine Grant to discuss this. Madeleine, you're very welcome to the show. You were writing about this, Madeleine, and you were saying when you were watching Kathleen Stock on Good Morning Britain that you expected to see a monster, but instead you were confronted with this softly spoken lady who was very rational, very logical.
Well, I was being slightly tongue-in-cheek because I'm actually a big admirer of Kathleen Stock, and I know quite well that she isn't a monster. But I suppose the joke was just the massive disconnect between the insults that are levied at her and then the kind of the moderation and the logic and the very balanced views that she expresses in public. There's a vast chasm between what people say about Kathleen Stock and the woman itself.
And do you think that's because the media have portrayed her, and indeed did in that interview, as someone with extreme views, when in actual fact a lot of people in the UK agree with what she has to say?
Yeah, I think that has a great deal to do with it. It's really interesting how I think there is many commentators forget the extent to which these views are the kind of the mainstream, the median opinion, and instead they talk about Kathleen Stock's views, which is, quite simply that it's impossible to change biological sex, as if this is an extreme proposition. And actually, it was a very interesting interview because over the course of it, Kathleen Stock basically got Ed Balls, who was her interviewer, to admit that he basically agrees with her on the reality of biological sex. But he began the interview saying, this is an extreme proposition. I see people of extremes on both sides hashing it out, when in actual fact, one of the extremes is just the idea that biological sex is immutable, which is something that a very large proportion of the public would agree with.
Yeah. And I mean, I said in my introduction that I find it strange in one of our premier universities that we're not allowed to have this discussion, that people object to having this discussion. I mean, surely that's what being at university is about, hearing different views and then making up your own mind as to what you believe.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I went to Oxford. I graduated in 2014. And even during the time that I was there, the 4 years that I studied there, I noticed that things were getting worse in that respect. We would have all kinds of speakers. And then in 2014, there was actually a debate between Tim Stanley, who's now a good friend and colleague of mine at The Telegraph, and Brendan O'Neill, the editor of Spiked magazine. And they were supposed to debate the issue of abortion. And actually, the Women's Society managed to get it banned because they said that two men couldn't possibly have a debate about abortion because it doesn't affect them at all. And this was the first time I noticed that well-agitated, well-organised small group of students could shut down a debate. And I think it was actually a bit of a turning point because there have been many, many examples since then. And it's just a shame that actually, much like happens with Kathleen Stock, what is often a real minority of students is allowed to kind of dictate the terms of debate for everybody else. And unfortunately, there are some in the media who give perhaps too much voice to this hysterical minority, and it gives everyone the impression that that's what all students think.
Well, it does, and I think that is really regrettable. And what we really need to allow the student population to do is to have these conversations and to debate in a civilised fashion. If we allow those with the loudest voices to drown out everybody else, surely that is really an affront to democracy.
Yeah, it is, because you will have a group of young people who, at a very formative time in their life, they will enter the workplace. And you may find that they've never had their views challenged at all. And actually, not even philosophical debates. I think that academics, younger academics of today, deal with students in a slightly more cotton wool way. Yeah. If you talk to older academics, they often have a more robust style of debate. It's the kind of Socratic method. And I think it's a real tragedy if young people are denied the opportunity to have to really hash it out in that way, because that's when you really learn how to formulate your own views, but also how to listen and to deal with things that might offend you, which will probably be quite a big part of life, is navigating people that you don't get on with or agree with, and that's just part of being a grown-up.
Well, certainly when I was at university, Madeleine, there was no such thing as trigger warnings or anything like that. And we were allowed to look into, I was doing law at the time, the background for ourselves and to come up with our own determinations, and then to be challenged, as you rightly say, by our tutors and our lecturers. And I think that is the absolute right way to go forward. But thank you, Madeleine, for joining me and discussing this. I thought it was tremendously powerful to see actually Kathleen Stock go to Oxford surrounded by, my goodness, minders so that she could make her point. But the fact that she did make her point, I think, was very powerful, and I'm sure you would agree with that.
I would agree completely. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thanks, Madeleine. Well, now, the amount of childcare for which families on benefits can claim back will increase by hundreds of pounds from the end of June under government's plans to tackle inactivity and to help grow the economy. The government will also help eligible parents cover the costs for the first month's childcare when they enter work or significantly increase their hours. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the CEO of Early Years Alliance, Neil Leach. Neil, you're very welcome to the programme. And I know we'll talk about regulations and the relaxation of them, but in terms of the increase in funding through universal credit, that's surely something to be welcomed.
Absolutely. It is fantastic news. It's long overdue, but let's not be critical of that. It's now happening. And I think for parents who've been struggling for some time now, that as I say, it's good news for them. I think the real challenge for them might be trying to find the places, though, if they're returning to work. And that, of course, is a significantly bigger issue.
Yeah, and Neil, the other element to this package, and Claire Coutinho, the Minister, was talking about this, is that some of the regulations which apply to training for those involved in childcare have been relaxed. I would imagine you're less enthusiastic about that.
We are, because it's not about the child. This is about, dare I say, childcare, not children. And the reality is that we have seen over recent months, frankly, a race to the bottom when it comes to policies about children. They are all about getting predominantly mums back into the working environment. And of course, we understand the importance of people being able to earn a decent wage. We understand about contributing to the economy. But when you start to neglect the interests of a child and child's development, I think you've lost the plot. And it is interesting that, you have Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, not so long ago on the airwaves telling us that young children's development had stalled. They needed more time. They needed more support than ever. And what we're seeing is a flurry of policy proposals that talk about relaxing more ratios, devaluing, deprofessionalising the sector. And I don't think that's good. If you take the policies one by one, I'm sure, for example, the requirement for level 2 maths, we've long argued, along with lots of people, that is that really appropriate for young children? But this isn't just about one policy. This is about basically diminution of the value of the sector, and that's why we're concerned.
But Claire Coutinho, the Minister, was saying that the reason that they're bringing forward these policies is to, quote, we're knocking down barriers to recruiting and retraining because we want to get more people into the industry so that there isn't this shortfall. And I know, certainly from my own experience, that it is very difficult to get people to enter into this arena, into this sector. Is that not the case, Neil?
Well, piling more pressure on early years educators isn't the answer. You have to fundamentally change the system, and that is about recognising the value of what these people do. And at the moment, as I say, it seems to be about getting predominantly mums back to work. That is not about recognising them as teachers, educators, child developers. And so fundamentally, don't tinker on the edges would be our suggestion. You have to adequately fund it. You have to give a professional path for people to be recognised and valued. And then basically you'll attract people into the system. Offering £500, £600, etc., to get somebody into the sector is a very short-term objective. And the reality is, government have launched all these new proposals in terms of so-called free childcare. Done it on a whim. Now they realise that they've got to basically have enough staff, enough providers to basically cope with this, and they know they will struggle.
Yeah, and Neil, isn't it the case, though, that there are some in the sector who have called for some of the regulations to be relaxed because they feel that they're too heavy on them and they find it difficult to comply with them?
Well, I wouldn't argue that some do say that, but the reality is that this is a consultation, so people will have the opportunity of airing their view. The only thing I would say is we've just come off the back of a consultation, so I use that word lightly. We came off the back of a consultation about changing the adult to child ratios. In other words, the number of children that educators could look after. And frankly, overwhelming opposition for that particular proposal. And what did government do? They ignored it. So government has no credibility when it argues that it's really going to consult with the sector. This is about, as I say, watering down the requirements so you can bring more people in, which basically undervalues the work that we do. We're not glorified babysitters. We develop young citizens. We create their future. And I think we've had this conversation before, but you know how critical the early years are in forming the life chances of a child. Yeah. Why wouldn't you value that workforce? Don't play games and basically say, we have asked for it all. We've asked for more funding. We've asked for more professionalism. We haven't asked for, relaxed ratios. Let us do anything. Bring anybody into the sector. So it's a false claim, frankly.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely do believe that childcare is undervalued because it's so important to have those early years with people who actually understand the child and who are professional in what they're doing, Neil. So we definitely agree on all of that. Neil, thanks for coming on the show and for talking about this very important issue. Thank you. Well, you're watching Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, is Sir Keir Starmer pinching the Tory party's policies? And it's Lilibet's second birthday today. Her parents have reportedly said they'll keep quiet from now on. But let's see if that happened. We'll be over to LA to talk to royal commentator Kinsey Scofield about all of that.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Of your letters, tweets.
Welcome back to Sunday with Arlene Foster. Well, in the past weeks, the Labour Party has rolled out new policies on crime, immigration and Brexit. It's been hypothecated that they're mirroring the Conservative policies. However, a YouGov poll published this week shows that nearly half of people, that's you at home, don't know what Keir Starmer's stance on Europe is. Most of those who do think that they know what he thinks on Europe are saying that it was wrong to leave, but if elected Prime Minister, he will not try to rejoin the EU. But does what he believe Is that really what he believes? Well, let's ask Chief Political Commentator for The Independent, John Rentoul. John, very welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. There's been a whole panoply of policy announcements recently, and you've been writing about those. But they do seem to be parking their tanks on the Tory lawn, as it were, on crime, on immigration. I read, I think, Labour saying that they were the party of law and order. That's normally a Conservative statement, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Although, Tony Blair did quite well in reclaiming crime from the Tories. It's good to see the Labour Party remembering how successful Tony Blair was. But what is surprising, you're absolutely right. I mean, the recent policy that Yvette Cooper came up with, the Shadow Home Secretary, she came up with a policy on immigration, which actually leaves Labour arguing for a more restrictive policy towards immigration than the government. That's astonishing. I mean, it's a rather technical proposal, but in effect, it is to they say a Labour government would prevent foreign workers from undercutting British workers in shortage occupations.
And John, my good friend Paul Embry used to say that that's what Brexit was about for him, being able to make sure that workers here in the UK had a good wage and good conditions, and that was something that made him vote in favour of Brexit. So is this the Labour Party really saying we are trying to ape what Tony Blair did to the Tories back in 1997?
Yeah, well, I mean, Tony Blair would not be in favour of Brexit, but I mean, certainly... No. It is very striking that the Labour Party is adopting what used to be the left-wing case for Brexit, the Lexit case that Paul Embry and others used to argue for, which is that that by stopping free movement of labour, you actually protect the incomes of low-paid British workers. Now, there's a huge economic argument about whether that would work or not, but it's fascinating that Keir Starmer has now adopted it.
Yeah, it is, exactly, given his previous stance in relation to us leaving the European Union. But the other issue that he's focusing on as well is buying land to build houses. Now, housing is a real issue, of course, for many young people, particularly in the south of the country. And I know Sadiq Khan doesn't agree with building on the Greenbelt, but this, again, is Keir Starmer moving onto territory which surely the Tories should be gaining on.
Well, it's territory recently vacated by the Tories, isn't it? Because, I mean, Boris Johnson was going to build. And then Rishi Sunak came along. Actually, Boris Johnson had, I mean, those were just words, and I think he'd already abandoned that policy. But Rishi Sunak confirmed that those national targets for house building would not be legally binding. And so Labour sort of stepped into that space. I mean, it's not quite so clear cut. It's not quite such an outflanking the Tories on the right type of policy, but it's certainly quite clever politics to occupy that space, especially given that it was only the other day that the Labour Party was arguing against developers and arguing in favour of giving local people the right to veto development.
And John, I mentioned Sadiq Khan there. He's only one of the people that has disagreed with that policy. But there must be a huge conversation going on in Labour about some of these policies, because some in the Labour Party will be scratching their heads and saying, hold on, is this our policy?
Absolutely. And, we're in a rather strange period of transition because, as you say, I mean, the Labour Party suddenly come to life on policy. I mean, after months of journalists and people in focus groups complaining that they didn't know what Labour stood for. Suddenly, Labour is producing policies at a rate of knots. I mean, we had Bridget Phillips, the Shadow Education Secretary, the other day, saying she wanted to make student loans cheaper without costing the government anything, which anyone can spot the flaw in that. But at least they are coming forward with policies, and they can be rigorously tested. But the big one is the Green Prosperity Plan, which Labour has shut up about recently, because that's a lot of extra money to be borrowed and spent over the period of a Labour government.
Yeah, and you mentioned money, and John, are these all costed? All of these policies, are they being costed? Are they being tested, or are they just something that they want to put out there as eye-catching to try and attract people to them?
Well, no, they have been costed, and it was very interesting because My colleague Hugo Jai of the I newspaper tried to tot up Labour's unfunded spending promises this last week and said that it would be the equivalent of adding 3p to the rate of income tax. But the Labour Party were out immediately saying, no, none of those policies that you've totted up are actually firm commitments on our part. So they're very keen to squash any of these arguments. The one thing that is still left uncertain and unresolved, and I gather there's a huge debate in the shadow cabinet and in the leader of the opposition's office about it, is this Green Prosperity Plan, which is a huge amount of money. Ed Miliband put out a press release last night talking about how important it was for jobs, but he didn't actually call it the Green Prosperity Plan, and he didn't put the 28 billion a year figure to it. So I suspect Labour's in retreat from that. Another move towards the centre ground and towards being closer to the Tories.
Yeah. And I noticed, John, just finally, that you were saying that a lot of these policies are not yet ready for the scrutiny of an election campaign this morning. I presume by that you mean they'll run into the election campaign and there'll be a lot of work done between now and then.
Well, they need to get on with it, because I think the plan is to have Labour's policy programme set by this autumn, so that they've then got a year before the likely general election next October. They've got a year on which to fight. I mean, because that's the period in which the media is going to start paying much more attention to Labour policies, and the voters will start to pay attention too. And they've got to make sure it's bomb-proof by then, and it's not yet. And the Green Prosperity Plan is the one big outstanding issue that Keir Starmer's going to have to decide. Is he going to promise to borrow and invest a vast amount of extra money in all this green technology, which would be bold, and a lot of his activists would love it. But the Conservatives are going to tear it apart in an election campaign, I suggest.
Yeah. And we'll see what the focus groups have to say as well, John. Anyway, John, thanks so much for joining me this morning. It's really good to have you on the show. Thanks a million. Well, as today marks Princess Lilibet's second birthday, it's been reported that King Charles has arranged a very special gift for his youngest grandchild. But will her parents hog the limelight or stay quiet, as they've promised to do? This comes as a friend of the late Queen has suggested that Prince Harry added unnecessary misery to the final months of his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth's life. Well, joining me now to discuss this is royal reporter Kinsey Scofield. Kinsey, really pleased that you could join us today. Hi, Kinsey.
So good to see you.
Lovely to see you too, yes. And Kinsey, tell us, do you know anything more about this present from King Charles that we've been hearing about this morning?
I mean, it sounds absolutely precious. A playhouse, basically, the same kind that Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret played in when they were little girls. We actually saw a glimpse of it recently in Harry and Meghan's Netflix special. They're kind of tucked inside, giggling, having a tea party. And I believe that's the inside of Queen Elizabeth's original little playhouse. A cubby is what it's called. And so reports are that King Charles has arranged for a very similar playhouse to be sent to Lilibet for her second birthday. It was around this time last year that he actually met his granddaughter, and the Queen met Lilibet, her namesake, during the Platinum Jubilee. And, Harry and Meghan were in the UK at this time last year, celebrating Lily's birthday party at Frogmore Cottage.
Yes, indeed. And there's a lovely little photograph of Lilibet. She certainly has her father's colouring in terms of her hair. But do we believe that there's going to be another photograph today issued? Do we expect that to happen, Kinsey?
Arlene, I don't think so, because we are hearing that William Morris Endeavour is asking Harry and Meghan to keep their traps shut, that they are overexposed at this point in time. There's apparently a big internal rebrand going on, and they're being advised to stay out of the limelight because the ultimate objective is to make Meghan like Reese Witherspoon or Angelina Jolie. And, it's hard to do that when their polling numbers, I believe it was over 40% of Americans in March said that they did not like the Duchess of Sussex. So there is a campaign apparently happening behind the scenes, and some of the advice that William Morris Endeavor has given Harry and Meghan is to pull it back. Stay behind the scenes, no more spilling the tea, and just kind of behave themselves while they try to wrangle this brand.
Well, Kinsey, that's going to be somewhat difficult given that Prince Harry's in court this week here in the UK.
He's in court this week well, first of all, I didn't realize that CBS here and Anderson Cooper were replaying Harry's interview this Sunday. So if they are trying to wrangle the brand, I'm sure they're dreading that rerun of that sit down with Anderson Cooper. But also we have the Heritage Foundation going to federal court on Tuesday here in the States, challenging Harry's visa application. They want to know whether the U.S. granted him some sort of special privilege, which is likely the case, or whether Harry lied on his application. So he is going to be in the news no matter what. So good luck to William Morris Endeavor.
And the King's on a private break away. I must say he looks very relaxed from the photographs that we've seen of him in Romania. That must be a welcome rest for him after a very, very busy May.
Absolutely. We hear that he's really enjoying his time there. And, the Telegraph actually reporting today that Charles is going to be selling his Welsh farmhouse. This was bought back in 2007. It cost £1.2 million. And so, I heard that he's doing this because he's no longer the Prince of Wales, and it's no longer a necessary place for him to stay. But I do think that he's trying to be a king of the people, downgrade a little bit, and be, I think it's an appropriate decision.
Yeah. Well, Kinsey, it's lovely to see you all the way from LA, and hopefully see you soon. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, as over 50 MPs have come out in favour of scrapping inheritance tax, should the government make a move towards this? And with Under the Sea reviews for Disney's remake of The Little Mermaid, I'll be talking to author Alex Larman.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Sunday Morning with Arlene Foster. Well, earlier this week, 4 former cabinet ministers and more than 50 Conservative MPs called for inheritance tax to be abolished. Nadhim Zawawi said that the tax was morally wrong. Jacob Rees-Mogg called it unfair. And Priti Patel said that it was regressive and punitive. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Elliot Keck. He's Investigations Campaign Manager for the Taxpayers Alliance. Well, Elliot, I suppose you agree with all of those characterisations of inheritance tax.
Yeah, we absolutely do at the Taxpayers Alliance. We'd like to see it abolished. I think, when it comes to inheritance tax, there's lots of taxes that we talk about where we talk about the negative economic impacts of the tax and the way it disincentivises work, investment, etc. But what's really distinct about inheritance tax is actually the fundamental immorality of it.
Yeah, and it's actually applying to more and more deaths as well, because the level at which inheritance tax kicks in has stayed the same since 2009. So at the very least, government should be looking to raise that. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, so in 2017, George Osborne added a property section where if you're passing on property, there's a slightly larger exemption. But yes, otherwise, you're right. Since 2009, it's been frozen at $325,000 and it's being frozen until 2027 to 28. So, if there's one thing the government can do, they could look at lifting that exemption. Because
I was reading earlier on today that the number of deaths affected now by inheritance tax has actually doubled since 2010, since the Tories came into government. And this is a very unconservative tax, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And what's so interesting about the tax is you're right, the number of estates it applies to has significantly increased, but it's still a relatively small number. And yet it's the third most unpopular tax in the United Kingdom. 50% of the public say it's an unfair tax, despite the fact that only around sort of 5-6% of estates pay it. And that's because the British people, even if they're not going to pay the tax themselves, recognise if you work hard all your life, if you pay tax on all of that income, when you then have that estate to pass on to your children, the idea that they should have to cough up sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds on money that's already been taxed, the British people do recognise is fundamentally unfair.
Well, it is double taxation. That's my view on the issue. And people working hard, normal people trying to save some money to pass on to their families, and then they're hit with inheritance tax. And when somebody passes away, it's a very difficult time, and then they go and they find out they're having to pay a huge amount of money to the government. You can see why it's hugely unpopular.
Yeah, you're facing having to sell, your family's property or some, major family assets that may be deeply beloved to you, but you simply have this huge tax bill from the Treasury that you have to pay.
It's hitting people that aren't really, in quotes, wealthy. I think that's why people are finding it so difficult. So, Elliot, do you think this campaign, which of course the Daily Telegraph is supporting and putting out there, do you think this campaign is going to work with government? Presumably there's a lot of Conservatives that would like to see this go.
Well, I think absolutely. I think it's a hugely unpopular tax. And, you look at Conservative voters up and down the country, that's red wall, but also blue wall. You're talking about aspirational people that want to pass on things to their children. And they're looking at this frozen inheritance tax threshold and increasingly thinking, is my property, are my assets going to be dragged into that band? And so, there is a real vote winner here for the Conservatives.
And we've talked about raising the threshold, but getting rid of it altogether, surely, wouldn't be actually a mad thing to do, because there's many countries across the world that don't have inheritance tax.
Yeah, Australia,
Sweden,
New Zealand. Yeah, plenty of countries don't have this tax. Yeah.
Because, and a lot of the people who are said, oh, no, we must keep inheritance tax from the left or whatever, and talk about equity and equality and the need to have, fairness across the system. Sweden doesn't have inheritance tax, and they're one of the countries that's held up as the most equitable in Europe.
Well, it's exactly right. And if you're interested in redistribution of wealth and income, there's other taxes that you should be looking at. So, this is a problem of double taxation. You're taxed on everything that you earn, everything that you spend, everything that you do, and the wealth that you have left and the assets that you have left, you should be able to pass that on to your children in full, or at least as close to full as possible.
Yeah. Is it going to happen, Elliot?
Well, I mean, there's always reasons to be pessimistic.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of talk at the minute about other tax and the fact that Rishi Sunak, the front page of the Telegraph today, talking about reducing the level either of national insurance or income tax. And I mean, I presume the Taxpayers Alliance would really welcome that.
Yeah, we'd like to see it done now rather than promised in a year's time. But I mean, listen, let's wait and see, right?
Yeah, yeah, and making other pledges in relation to the NHS means that the money has to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's always the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Elliot, thanks so much for joining me today and talking about this issue. I'm sure this issue will be one that will be talked about for quite some time, particularly coming up to the election next year. I think it's really important that we have these discussions, but inheritance tax is one that will stay on the agenda. Thanks, Elliot. Now, the latest Disney remake of The Little Mermaid has attracted a lot of attention. The diverse casting of Halle Bailey, a black American actress in the role of Ariel, raised a lot of eyebrows. This week, the Internet Movie Database has been forced to change its rating system for the movie after review bombers targeted the new live-action release. Well, joining me now to discuss this is journalist and author Alex Larman. Alex, it's really good to have you on the show. Obviously, you've seen the movie. Tell us what you thought.
Well, the trouble is, Arlene, is that it's a film that's based on an animated film from the late 1980s, and that film was about an hour and a half long. This film goes on 2.25 hours. And the problem is that you get to a stage, probably about an hour and a half in, the length of the original film, you become very, very bored indeed. Because the thing is about The Little Mermaid is, yes, it's woke. Yes, all the changes that have been made are generally for the worse. But it's also, as a piece of filmmaking, not very accomplished. And so, yes, you can see that a lot of people criticising it are because of Halle Bailey's colour, because obviously she's a mermaid. A mermaid has to be a certain colour. This is a well-known fact. But it's also that as a piece of cinema, it doesn't work very well, because what you can see is that Disney, as with all of their other films, they've not taken any risks. They've tried to make it filmmaking by committee. The reason why it ultimately fails is because there are structural things that it does, which makes a nonsense of the entire film. I mean, I would go into a spoiler now, but I think it's quite important to express this. In the original film, there's a scene at the beginning when the Ariel character, who's the mermaid, rescues Prince Eric. And then at the end, in the big denouement, he rescues her. So that's quite a nice bit of parallel. It's quite a nice structural thing. In the film, in the live-action film, she rescues him twice. Once at the beginning, once at the end. So the white male character has all agency removed whatsoever, and it ends up essentially being this rather absurd exercise in wish fulfillment. Now, you can't judge it as a serious piece of filmmaking, because it's a Disney live-action film about a Little Mermaid, as the title implies. And it's interesting because it's done very well at the box office in America, but internationally, it's not doing very well at all. That might be because the word of mouth has been absolutely appalling. It might be because people are sick and tired of the Disney live-action remakes. It might also be that perhaps, and what I'm interested in, is the idea that Disney are getting it wrong, because ever since they've been on this mad policy of trying to revive as many of their intellectual property things as possible, whether it's the Disney cartoons, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Marvel, there's a real sense at the moment that they're just throwing a lot of money at this streaming service they've got, Disney+. And there's no real imagination. I mean, what's so depressing about The Little Mermaid as a film is that it doesn't feel like a piece of cinema. It just feels like a focus-grouped piece of ideological nonsense, which at 2.25 hours are quite tiresome, actually.
Yeah, I was reading that one film buff had said that it sacrifices all the charm and fun for personal politics. And we shouldn't forget, of course, that this is meant to appeal to young people, and they go to the cinema to enjoy a movie. They don't go to be lectured, do they?
Well, I saw it with my 7-year-old daughter, and she said to me about an hour in, "Daddy, I'm really bored." And then two hours in, she said, "Daddy, I'm really bored." And of course, my daughter is exactly the sort of person who's the target audience for a film like this, because she's somebody who's very interested in male and female roles. Even at that age, she's interested in the idea of being empowered. But the problem is that it doesn't work even on its own terms, and that's what I resent so much. It's that it's one thing for a film to be woke and to succeed artistically, but when it tries to be woke and it fails artistically, you're just left with this rather boring, rather flat exercise, which, if you excuse the pun, is rather waterlogged from the beginning.
And Alex, tell me, there was some reports that there was a dig at the Princess of Wales in the Little Mermaid movie. I wasn't quite sure what sort of a dig that was going to be or what it was. Did you notice it? Was there something there?
Yes, there's a bizarre bit when they're talking about what names a princess should have, and Diana is raised as the first name, but then it's Catherine, and someone says, oh, no, not Catherine. And I was thinking, if this is a coincidence, it's a very strange coincidence. If it's a dig at the Princess of Wales, I was thinking, why? I mean, it isn't as if one looks at the Princess of Wales and thinks she's a controversial or unpleasant character. And I mean, I'd really love to know the process that went into the screenwriting and the direction of that scene, because you think, I mean, this is also supposed to be a film about women, a film about empowering women. So to have a dig at a very high-profile woman would seem rather out of kilter. And so, I mean, honestly, I do not know if that was intentional, just some mean-spirited and rather unpleasant dig, or just accidental because it's just another piece of amateurishness.
It's not incredibly inclusive, I have to say, by saying, oh, no, anybody who's called Catherine can't be a princess. But in any event, do you think they'll be doing any more remakes, Alex? I mean, are Lilo and Stitch going to be remade now? I mean, I love Lilo and Stitch, I have to declare that.
The trouble is, Arlene, is that what I was worried about was if it was as big a success as it was proven to be in America, at least, that we were going to have nothing but an endless stream of live-action remakes. We are now going to have nothing but a stream of live-action remakes. Yeah. And the trouble is, yes, that's going to be Lilo and Stitch as well. The question you have to ask is, but who's it for? I mean, is it for people who saw the films first time round, like me, and are now taking their children to see them? But the problem is that you take something like The Lion King, which was an absolutely tremendous animated film. As a live-action film, it doesn't work at all. And of course, the problem is that you can get away with things in animation, which you cannot in live-action. I mean, there's a rather creepy crab in The Little Mermaid, and it just looks weird, because I think it would be absolutely fine if you see it in a cartoon. As soon as you have this live-action CGI crab, it starts to look peculiar, and I think that goes for a lot of a film, actually. But it just feels, I think it goes for so much contemporary filmmaking, people are trying to fit films into a box now, and they're not actually allowing them to be pieces of cinema. They're trying to get them into these very narrow categories, which are essentially appealing to this imagined audience. But I don't believe that audience really cares that much. I mean, most people do not want to go and see a film for a lecture on gender politics or racial politics or anything else, or indeed environmental politics, which is quite a large part of the film's mise en scène. People want to go and be entertained. I think that ultimately political ideology doesn't have a place in a children's film.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Alex, finally, this looks to be part of a wider agenda, not only with Disney, but with many cultural warriors that are out there at the moment. So this is going to continue, isn't it?
Oh, yes, this isn't going anywhere. And I think the problem is that it's getting worse and worse year in, year out. Of course, what's going to be interesting is to see ultimately how audiences respond to it. Because if people stop paying to go and see these films because they're sick of it, and by that, I don't just mean conservative audiences. I don't mean the sort of audiences who would look at a website like the Worth It or Woke It website. I mean just the average people who are paying their £10, £12, £15 to go and see a film like The Little Mermaid. Because ultimately, if you're not being entertained, if you feel like being beaten over the head with a placard, then you think to yourself, well, I can stay at home. I don't need to spend my money. Because going to the cinema for a family of four is quite an expensive day out. And I think that ultimately people do not want to spend a lot of money in difficult circumstances to go see films without that sort of message.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Alex, for joining us this morning. I really enjoyed our conversation. Well, coming up, should parents be fined for out-of-control kids? That's what Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reid suggests. I'll be talking to a head teacher about this. And are you one of the drivers finding themselves penalised by the new slow driving zones? What can be done about this? I'll be speaking to a motoring lawyer. So does beloved British author Beatrix Potter's work need to be relooked at? We've just been talking about it, as a university lecturer has suggested that. She she has took influence from African folklore for her tales. Well, we'll be having a good conversation about all that and much more to come in the next hour. You're watching Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Plenty of sunshine to come through the rest of Sunday. It will be cloudy across the far northeast, always warmest in the west too. And looking at the bigger picture, this high pressure's been around for quite some time now and it isn't going anywhere fast either. Perhaps some signs of a change towards next weekend. But for this weekend, the rest of it, we've got plenty of sunshine across the UK, just some lower cloud across northeast Scotland, flirting with some eastern coast of England at times too, and the breeze still coming in from the North Sea, so it's quite chilly here. But in the sunshine it will feel warm, temperatures reaching around the mid-20s. Perhaps an isolated shower developing across Northern Ireland, central parts of Scotland in the afternoon. Into the evening time, we see that low cloud in the North Sea just starting to push back inland, and that continues to move southwestwards as we move overnight too. Perhaps thick enough for a few spots of drizzle here or there. Western areas staying the clearest. Here we could see a few shallow mist and fog patches developing, and under the clear spells, just like recent nights, temperatures dipping away. So a fresh start to Monday. A bit of a west-east split. Sunshine across western parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, the fringes of Wales, the West Country, while central and eastern areas a cloudy start to the day. And just notice how that cloud does take its time to burn away and push back towards the coast. So some eastern areas could stay cloudy quite a bit of Monday afternoon as well. And in the sunshine, temperatures a little lower compared to the weekend, but still reaching the low 20s towards the west and southwest. And then to end the day, again, just the isolated shower possible across Scotland, perhaps Northern Ireland. And into the evening time, we see this cloud rolling back in from the North Sea once again. Over the next few days, there will be quite a bit of cloud around at times, particularly in the east. The further west, we hold on to the sunshine and temperatures continue to rise.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to the second hour of Sunday with Arlene Foster on GB News. Well, we've got a packed schedule ahead. Starting off, I'm going to take a look at Labour's proposals to put off repeat youth offenders by fining their parents up to £1,000. And as 20-mile-per-hour zones are rolled out across the UK, the number of speeding fines has equally spiralled out of all control. I'll be speaking to a motoring lawyer about that. Nearly 5,000 cases of spiking were reported between 2021 and 2022, with a shockingly low figure of only 2% of offences prosecuted. I'll be joined by campaigner Dawn Downs. And Beatrix Potter's tales have recently been accused of taking inspiration from African folklore. Is this the case, and do we need to relook at her stories? And finally, we'll be celebrating the UK's love of fish and chips. I'll be joined by the owner of London's oldest fish and chip shop. All that to come, but first, here's your latest news headlines with Ray.
Good afternoon. 1 minute past midday. Here's the latest. Our top story. India's rail minister is blaming changes to the points and signalling system for the country's worst train crash in decades. Ashwini Vaishnaw made the claim during a visit to the site as recovery work and an investigation got underway. It's thought that 2 passenger trains collided when one derailed. Both then crashed into a goods train, killing 288 people.
We will try to restore this track today. All the wagons, coaches and bodies have been removed. The restoration operation is in full swing, and we will try to finish the restoration work by Wednesday morning, so that by then, trains will be able to run normally.
The Immigration Minister has told GB News it's wrong for migrants to demand better hotel accommodation while waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. It's after a protest was sparked in London by migrants being asked to sleep 4 to a room. Speaking to Camilla Tominey, Robert Jenrick said the government will never put their interests above the British public. He also said that sharing hotel rooms is necessary to get value for taxpayers' money.
Remember, these are migrants who have said they are destitute. They've said that they have absolutely nowhere to stay, no friends, no family, no money, and the taxpayer is stepping up and providing them with good quality accommodation and board and lodgings. And so, you know, I think those migrants are wrong to protest and say that they deserve to have single bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I'm pleased to see that common sense seems to have prevailed in this case.
A Labour MP has told GB News that victims are too scared to complain about sexual predators in Parliament. Charlotte Nichols told Camilla Tominey that harassment is baked into every single part of how Westminster operates. She also accused the Labour Party of choosing not to act on concerns raised about a number of colleagues over a very long period. Her comments come after she revealed being handed a list of 30 MPs that she should avoid when first becoming an MP.
It's happened to me in meetings during the middle of the working day. I've had colleagues do things like inappropriate touching, you know, their hand on your leg or on your back or making comments towards you. And I'm someone that, as I said, within the hierarchy of Westminster is relatively protected by virtue of being an MP. So how much worse it must be if you're someone who has less power in the institution, where you're more likely to experience it and even less able to speak out when it happens.
The Prime Minister is stressing the importance of a close and candid relationship with the US President. That's ahead of his visit to the White House next week. Rishi Sunak is expected to attend a baseball game in Washington, D.C. prior to talks with Joe Biden. He'll also be meeting business executives in an attempt to build closer economic ties between the two countries. More than 2,600 NHS staff in Scotland have taken time off work due to long COVID, with some off sick for more than 2 years. That's according to Freedom of Information requests made by the Scottish Liberal Democrats. The Scottish Government says that it's investing £10 million into the Long COVID Support Fund. The Duke of Sussex will appear at the High Court tomorrow to give evidence against the publisher of the Daily Mirror over alleged unlawful information gathering. Harry claims that around 140 published articles contained information gathered using unlawful methods, including phone hacking. Mirror Group Newspapers is contesting the claims. Royal correspondent Michael Cole says it will be very unusual to see a royal on the witness stand.
A royal prince going into the witness box to give evidence in a very contentious case against Mirror Group newspapers. That hasn't happened ever since the 19th century. It is unprecedented. I mean, there's nothing in the British Constitution that says a royal prince cannot give evidence or cannot be called to be a witness.
To international news, and 4 children have died and a man is missing in Canada after they were swept into a river in Quebec. Police say the group was fishing when the incident happened. The children, who were all over the age of 10, were found unresponsive on the shore. 6 other people have been rescued. Back here, meteorologists say there is a small chance that the temperature could reach 26 Celsius today, which would make it the hottest day of the year so far. It's likely to be warmest somewhere in the west of the country, along with parts of Wales and possibly southwest England too. Meanwhile, the Met Office says the dry weather is expected to continue into next week. More hot days to come. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Dame Arlene.
Thanks to Ray for that news bulletin, and indeed for confirming that West is best, as some of us knew all along. Anyway, parents whose children repeatedly break the law will be made to take responsibility and enrol in court-ordered caregiving classes. They could also face up to £1,000 fines under new Labour proposals. Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reid said the use of parenting orders would be expanded under a Labour government in a crackdown on antisocial behaviour. Well, joining me now to discuss this is head teacher Serge Sifai. Serge, thank you for joining me this morning. What do you make of these proposals from Labour? Do you think they would work?
Well, I don't know if they work or not, but for me, a step in the right direction. I think as adults, we've long ago abdicated our responsibility in bringing up children. An awful lot of institutions come under huge pressure, but somehow parents and their responsibility towards bringing up children properly seems to be forgotten. So for me, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of teachers, a step in the right direction. How they implement it, of course, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, it's another example of the opposition being on territory, I think, that the Conservative Party should be on, actually, because to me it's, just as you've actually said, it's about parental responsibility, which to me is a Conservative thing to do, to take charge of your children.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's a party political thing. I have to tell you, it's a justice thing. I think for 44 years in teaching now, I've seen a gradual deterioration in just people taking responsibility full stop. I really worry about how we're bringing up the next generation of children. Things are never anybody's fault. No one takes responsibility. When things get tough, we seem to just look to the state to bail us out. I'm not sure that's a very good way to bring up children.
Serge, you're speaking my language this morning. This is exactly what I have been saying for so long. When something happens, you have to take responsibility for it as a child. You don't try and blame your teacher or somebody else for the problem. And that's how I was brought up.
I'm fortunate. Yeah, I'm fortunate as a head teacher. I've got a school gate, and I can largely dictate what goes on, inside it, and ignore, because I've been teaching a long time. I can ignore some of the nonsense that has been going on. I have to say, seemingly a long time. I think COVID has made things even worse. And as I say, we talk about resilience. I'm of an age where when you fell over, you were told, well, get up, dust yourselves down and get on with it. I think now children are being taught something totally different. And I go back to this word resilience. Yeah. And of course, this day and age, our children actually are faced with huge challenges that we never had to do. We were allowed to be children for a lot longer than seemingly our children are. And that's why I go back to my original point. We as adults, we've abdicated our responsibility to bring up children properly. If this is a step backwards into trying to make us responsible parents, responsible adults, bring up children properly, then I'm all for it.
Yeah. And I mean, that issue of resilience is not just something it's a very tangible thing, because if you don't have resilience, then you can't deal with the challenges that you'll face in later life. And if it's not baked in when you're a child, as it should be baked in when you're a child, then it won't happen. Oh dear, we've lost Serge, and we were going so well on all our conversation about resilience, which is one of my favourite topics. But in any event, I want to thank Serge for coming on and having that conversation. We're going to move on now to the issue of speed. And first of all, we're going to talk about slowness of speed. The increase in the use of 20-mile-per-hour speed limits has led to a record number of drivers being convicted for speeding. More than 200,000 motorists were prosecuted and convicted in court for speeding offences in England and Wales last year. A 16% increase of a total of 200,000 in 2021. Nottingham was the police force area that saw the largest year-on-year increase in 2022, with the number of convictions more than doubling from 4,089 to 9,444. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the lawyer, Nick Freeman. Nick, you have a very particular view in relation to this 20 miles per hour speed limit, that it's nearly impossible to keep to 20 miles per hour. Isn't that right?
Yeah, good afternoon, Arlene. Yeah, to me, it's counterintuitive. It's generally too slow. I mean, because what happens is you're so obsessed with trying to keep at 20 miles an hour that you're looking at your speedometer all the time. And of course, as drivers, what we need to be doing is concentrating on our speed, but other things as well, what other cars are doing, who's around us, etc. There's a whole combination of things that we need to be looking at. And when you're doing something that actually is against the run of the car. I mean, I drove on Edgware Road last having come off the motorway, and the car kept going up to 21, 22, and I had to keep putting my foot on the brake to keep under 20. Obviously cognizant of the fact that if you go more than 10% plus one, you're going to be prosecuted, and that's what's happening. So I'm not suggesting we should never have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I think there's a time and a place for them. The time is obviously sort of school time, certain places, but by and large it's too slow. And if, you know, in London they've got 50 miles at the moment which are subject to 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. They want in 2024 that needs to be 137. And you have to ask yourself, you know, what is it achieving? Because the statistics actually show that it has very little impact on safety. And my view is when there's some proper research done, obviously you're not going to hurt someone as much at 20 miles an hour, but you're probably going to have more accidents because you're not concentrating on what you should be concentrating on. So, you know, I'd like to see it being targeted, be selective at right times, but not just a blanket, let's everyone go 20 miles an hour, because it's counterintuitive. And it causes anger for drivers, you know, drivers who are sitting on empty roads in the early hours of the morning being restricted to 20 miles an hour. It's incredibly frustrating. The majority say the majority, a significant, over 40% say we break it because we don't understand it, it doesn't make sense. So surely we need to collaborate. Most motorists are sensible, the majority are sensible, they are law-abiding. We just need to have something that works for all of us. And this, in my view, is too slow and actually poses a danger, and certainly doesn't increase road safety. I mean, you know, I understand the argument, the slower you go, the less chance of hurting someone. someone, well, at 20 miles an hour, you're saying to yourself, I might as well get out and walk, which of course is what they want, but that doesn't work.
Yeah, well, just to take that on, I mean, it is a further attack on drivers, is it not, and trying to get people out of their cars. But I mean, it may not have a big impact on safety, but it certainly has an impact on revenue raising when you see the amount of fines that have been put into people.
Well, as you rightly say, it's 236,000 more prosecutions in 2021. Obviously, those dates, I wonder what it is in 2022. I'm sure it'll be much, much higher. And one does have a suspicion that actually there's some revenue inspiration behind this. It's not just anti-motorists, but motorists are just easy game, aren't they? Because they pay up, they don't want the aggravation, and they pay up, and they're such an easy target. But we need to be concerned sensibly with road safety, and this isn't working. And at the same time, on the motorway, when the motorways are empty, 70 miles an hour is too slow. I appreciate that's a different argument, but it doesn't just want to be one-way traffic. We need to sit down and discuss what we're trying to achieve, which obviously is to make our roads safer, but they need to work for everyone. And at the moment, they're working less and less efficiently.
And I'm just interested, finally, Nick, what your view was on smart motorways, because I saw a photograph of a motorway there, and that reminded me of the whole smart motorway debate. Were you in favour of smart motorways?
No, I'm afraid I've attacked them from their very inception. I'm all for getting traffic moving, but the moment you say there's no escape route, there's no hard shoulder, the lanes are too narrow, the technology doesn't work, and when it does work, it's wholly inadequate. And when motorists say we feel unsafe, then they are unsafe. And the statistics show, when you break down, I spent a lot of time, unfortunately, on the roads. And I came on, it was yesterday, I was driving south on the M6, and it was like a car park. And then we came across three cars in an accident on the third and fourth lane. And there were no signs whatsoever referring to this. The lanes weren't closed, it was live, people were outside the cars. And you think, oh my God, what is going on in 2023? Is this really smart? And the government now have recognised it, and they're trying to backpedal. But I'm very much against it. I couldn't resist asking you, Nick, because I thought they were madness altogether. But in any event, thanks so much for joining me, Nick, and talking about those 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. And now we're going to the fast speed, because we're going over to the TT races. The 2023 TT races have kicked off yesterday with the opening Super Sport race, the first of an unprecedented 8 solo races in the week. Everyday life on the Isle of Man will grind to a halt, and tens of thousands will arrive by sea and air to watch the races. Well, joining me now is Northern Ireland GB News reporter Dougie Beattie, who has made that journey across to the Isle of Man. Dougie, give us the latest news.
Well, Arlene, welcome to Douglas here in the capital of the Isle of Man, and it is sun-drenched. There is thousands of people here, and within the next hour or so, one of our countrymen, Michael Dunlop, will attempt to make it his 23rd win on the Isle of Man. Yesterday he won the opening race, making it 22, and of course Michael Dunlop is from a dynasty, a very famous racing dynasty of the Dunlops. His father was Robert Dunlop, a British champion, very successful motorcycle racer, and of course his uncle Joey Dunlop, one of the most well-known names in motorcycle racing. He was a 5 times Formula 1 world champion, and he holds the record here for 26 TT wins. So Michael will try to break that this week. He started well yesterday. In about an hour's time he's going to leave the grandstand here and head down towards that Solby Street and down towards Ballacrane, and at that he will be doing over 200 miles an hour, never mind 20 miles an hour. Put another 0 to the back of that on 2 wheels. He unofficially broke the lap record here during practice last week at 135.58 miles per hour averaging. That's an average speed. So in parts of this course, and an awful lot of it, he will be doing over 200 miles an hour between hedges, lampposts and walls. That is a frightening thought for any of us that are sitting here and people that are watching it. But it does amazing things for tourism in the Isle of Man. I mean, I flew into Castletown this morning. The plane was relatively full. Every guest house and hotel here is full. And this has been part of racing's life history for many, many years. And many, many things have come out of this, Arlene. I mean, if we look at Johnny Ray Sr., his son was a 6-time world champion in the World Superbikes, and he won the Isle of Man. And of course, development of road bikes in particular comes from using them on public roads, especially tyres and so forth, suspension. Rex McCandless, a man from Killock in Northern Ireland, invented the featherbed frame, which was back in the 40s and 50s. Up to that point, motorcycles more or less were like push bikes, glorified push bikes. So all of this is pushing forward and making the Isle of Man very relevant till today's sporting calendars.
Well, you're looking very sun-drenched there, Dougie. I hope you have a great time at the TT. There'll be plenty of Northern Ireland people there, I'm sure, to join you, because road racing is such a big thing in Northern Ireland, of course, with our own road races over the summer. And, of course, we've had the Northwest 200 just recently in Northern Ireland. Well, coming up, there's been an exponential rise in spiking cases, but shockingly, only 2% of those are prosecuted. I'll be speaking to campaigner Dawn Dines about this after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to Sunday Morning with Arlene Foster. Well, nearly 5,000 cases of spiking were reported between September 2021 and August 2022. But less than 2% of offences have led to a prosecution. The latest data revealed that in 2020. The MP for Gloucester, Richard Graham, has spoken about the issue in Parliament back in January of this year, and he's due to raise it again on June the 13th. I'm joined now by Dawn Dines, CEO and founder of Stamp Out Spiking, who's been campaigning against this issue for almost 2 decades. Dawn, it's lovely to see you again. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Tell us what's happening now in relation to this issue. You want the law on spiking to be reviewed, and that debate in January achieved cross-party consensus at the time, didn't it? So why hasn't there been more movement?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much, Arlene, for having me on to discuss this. We're at a vital stage, it feels like, right now. So when we went in January with Richard Graham, we had 5 cross-political parties all agreed that spiking needs to be recognised within the law. Now, nothing has happened yet again. So we're going back to Westminster to have this debate again. I've been informed from the National Police Chief Council that Operation Leicester has now finished. Now, we understand that these operations do have to finish, but now that means we're back to square one, where spiking cases are not being recorded correctly because we have no specific offence code. It's absolutely vital that the law is updated to show that spiking is a recognised criminal offence. Arlene, I just want to say I'm so sorry. Every time I come on with you, I just feel like I'm moaning, but we've had Girls' Night In, we've had the Home Affairs Committee, we're on the second 10-minute rule bill. We've got backing from, Priti Patel, the National Police Chief Council. It's like, how much more can we do? Apart from today, I would love to reach out to your viewers and to ask if anybody's been spiked or they've witnessed their friends, their family, their daughter, their son being spiked. Could they please fill in our survey? We're doing a research survey with Cardiff University called A Victim's Journey, because then we will be able to show the government exactly where we've been letting victims down time and time again. So, sorry for moaning.
No, you're not moaning at all. You're making the case and making it very well, Dawn, as always. And Tom Tugendhat was the minister who responded to that debate back in January. And he said at the time that he would have to reflect on the fact that everybody was supporting what was happening in your campaign. And this national survey that you're now engaging on, do you intend to bring the results of that to government then to try and push on with your campaign, Dawn?
Most definitely. We want to hear about how people were either not believed, how they weren't, their samples weren't taken on time. That journey is so important, from what happens from in the environment where it happened. Could be a pub, a nightclub, a festival. We've had people been spiked at a wedding, at works dues, at university dues where there's only students there. So, this happens. Spiking has no prejudice. And while all this political unrest is all going on, and now we're going to have more elections, people are still getting spiked on our streets every weekend. It's vital that we gain this key information. We've got International Stamp Out Spiking Day on the 15th of July. We're talking to different countries across the world now, because this is happening on a global scale, not just here in the UK.
Well, I was really struck. I don't know whether you were watching Camilla Tominey this morning, but she was interviewing a Labour MP about the atmosphere in Westminster. And Camilla asked her if she felt that spiking actually took place in Parliament. I mean, you've mentioned it happens at universities, it happens at weddings, it happens. Can you imagine if this was actually happening in Parliament as well?
Well, we've had reports that people will spike each other so they can get one over on people in interviews. So, and we've already heard that spiking has happened. I think there was a report a while ago. So, this is going on. Look at Bill Crosby over in America. And now he's just been released. We've had people being caught for spiking up in Liverpool, and that they were caught in the act on CCTV by the police, and they didn't get a conviction. This is because spiking is not recognised within the law. This is why it's urgently needed to be updated so that we can adequately train the key emergency services. We can, everybody will be singing off the same hymn sheet, and there'll be zero tolerance on any spiking whatsoever, which includes alcohol.
Well, Dawn, it's been lovely to have you on the show. It is quite a change from when I was out and about in my teenage years, when there was no problem leaving your drink on the bar or whatever. Now my young friends tell me that that's not the done thing. You have to make sure that all of this is watched, and that's even before you talk about injections and what have you. I mean, it is a very frightening place out there, and I really commend you for continuing with the campaign. And I'm sure we'll be talking again, Dawn, about this, hopefully, to say that the law is changing. Thanks for coming on, Dawn. Thanks very much. Well, you're watching Sunday with Arlene Foster on GB News. We're going to talk about Peter Rabbit next. Did Peter Rabbit author Beatrix Potter find story inspiration in African folk tales? Well, that's what one university lecturer has recently suggested, and she's saying that it should be more widely recognised. Well, I'll be joined by a cultural historian to discuss that. But first, here's a reminder of this afternoon's latest news.
It's 12:30. I'm Ray Addison. Our top story. India's rail minister is blaming changes to the points and signalling system for the country's worst train crash in decades. Ashwini Vaishnaw made the claim during a visit to the site as recovery work and an investigation got underway. It's thought that 2 passenger trains collided when one derailed. Both then crashed into a goods train, killing 288 people. The immigration minister has told GB News it's wrong for migrants to demand better hotel accommodation while waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. It's after a protest was sparked in London by migrants being asked to sleep 4 to a room. Speaking to Camilla Tominey, Robert Jenrick said sharing hotel rooms is necessary to get value for taxpayers' money.
Remember, these are migrants who have said they are destitute. They've said that they have absolutely nowhere to stay, no friends, no family, no money, and the taxpayer is stepping up and providing them with good quality accommodation and board and lodgings. And so, you know, I think those migrants are wrong to protest and say that they deserve to have single bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms and so on. And I'm pleased to see that common sense seems to have prevailed in this case.
A Labour MP has told GB News that victims are too scared to complain about sexual predators in Parliament. Charlotte Nichols also accused the Labour Party of choosing not to act over concerns raised about a number of colleagues. Her comments come after she revealed being handed a list of 30 MPs that she should avoid when she first became an MP. And the Duke of Sussex will appear at the High Court tomorrow to give evidence against the publisher of the Daily Mirror over alleged unlawful information gathering. Harry claims that around 140 published articles contained material gathered using unlawful methods, including phone hacking. Mirror Group Newspapers is contesting the claims. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get back to Dame Arlene.
Well, now think of Beatrix Potter and her tales of Peter Rabbit, Jemima Puddleduck and Mrs Tiggywinkle most probably spring to mind. Potter's popular stories with their country garden settings and recognisable illustrations have been entrenched in British children's bookshelves over this past century. Yet the stories may not be as British as we may believe. Dr. Emily Zobel Marshall, in a recent essay, suggested there should be greater acknowledgement of the debt Potter owed to the Brer Rabbit stories told by enslaved Africans working on American plantations, claiming for far too long they have been stealing from his briar patch. Well, the Beatrix Potter Society has come out and defended the author against the claims that she lifted her most famous stories from African folk tales and concealed the sources. Joining me now to discuss this is cultural historian and lecturer at the University of Leeds, Dr. Philip Kinsey. Philip, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Well, this is just the latest, isn't it, in an attack on some of our most beloved literature, and it's pretty joyless as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, first off, it's lovely to speak to you, Arlene. Yeah, I'm surprised that the moralising thought police have come onto this so late, actually. She mentions the African stories in her letters. Her family have connections with cotton, and they're sleeping on the job. You know, their one role in life is to complain about everything, and they can't even do that properly. I mean, the reason I say that is because, and I'm not singling out a particular scholar here. I'm talking about a trend, and it is a trend. And like
it is a trend.
It's vacuous, it's shallow, and it's also contemptible as well. So I think we have to treat it as such, and we have to send it up. But also, it really isn't about social justice. It's just about destroying British culture. It's about cancelling British literature. Because if it was about social justice, I've said this before, but if it was about social justice, these people would be interested in slavery that's going on, which is alive and unfortunately well in Africa right now, slavery in the Middle East. They'd be concerned about the Uyghur Muslims in China. But if you think about it, what's easier to attack? Peter Rabbit or the Chinese Communist Party? You're going to go for Peter Rabbit, aren't you?
Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree with you more. These cultural warriors are looking, digging around, trying to destroy beloved literature. And as I've said, you couldn't get more British, the countryside, the way in which she told the stories, and Beatrix Potter. And I mean, I think, as you have rightly said, she never hid the fact that she was taking her inspiration from a range of sources, including Brer Rabbit. So it is very much a political agenda, isn't it? But I mean, how do we stop this continuous attack on some of our beloved literature?
Well, I suppose we have to point out the ludicrousness of it, and we have to point. I think you already called it joyless, didn't you? And I think that's how we deal with it. But I think we have to say, look, culture is about sharing, it's about influencing, it's about referencing, it's about adaptation. Culture is generally appropriation. That's how we grow. It's called creativity. And I don't want to live in a world that is devoid of creativity, that's devoid of sharing, for all of these ridiculously made-up reasons that change day after day. It's almost like a kind of cultural mental illness or a cultural instability. They know the rules because they're making them all up, but we just look on aghast. So I think it's pushing back in that way and making it out for the kind of ludicrousness that it is.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the point you're making is a very powerful one, that we do, of course, look across and take inspiration from a wide variety of places, wherever we visit and whatever we read. But we're not, I mean, as you rightly say, the rules are being changed all of the time. I mean, the allegation here is that she hasn't given enough acknowledgement to the African background. I mean, my goodness, where does this end? I have to say, I mean, I don't want to be depressive, but it really does get you down when this is a daily occurrence now.
Yeah, Arlene, I think that the point is it doesn't end, and we have to really push back and make it end. I think, you know, it's going to come to a stage where we say, look, let them have their ghastly idea of what culture is, and we'll keep ours. You know, we'll conserve our past. I know which is the better one, and by we I mean sensible people of all colours. It seems to me that you've just said that there's one rule for them and one rule for us. So the rule for us is English British history and how we destroy that, and the rule for everybody else is there is just no criticality for anybody else, especially the global south. You know, and the final point I think which is important and which I would like to make is that these folk tales don't belong to Africa. There are similar versions right across the globe, on all continents. And Vladimir Prop, the literary folklorist Vladimir Prop, was telling us this in 1928. It's no different now.
Yeah. Well, Philip, thank you so much for coming on and for having that conversation about the wonderful works of Beatrix Potter. Thank you. Well, Manchester City remain on course for a legendary treble after the victory in the FA Cup final at Wembley. Ilkay Gundogan scored twice to give them victory over Manchester United in a largely one-sided affair. And our reporter, Sophie Reaper, has the story.
One city, two teams. One red, one blue. An ancient rivalry played out in an FA Cup final for the very first time. Yesterday, tens of thousands of Manchester City and Manchester United fans made the pilgrimage to Wembley in order to support their teams. As the day wore on and kick-off drew ever closer, it was clear expectations were high.
100% trust in them. Too much trust in them. But we're going to beat them anyway, it's fine.
I'm quietly confident. I'm very confident, actually.
Derby matches are always a bit of a nightmare, but fingers crossed.
We're big underdogs and they're a hell of a team. They've done brilliantly. But I believe we can beat them today.
I've supported them for so long and it's our time now. It's just our time.
At 3 o'clock, the whistle blew and the game began. Within just 13 seconds, City's captain İlkay Gündoğan had smashed a volley into the back of the net. Not only did that give his side a near instantaneous lead, but it also broke the record for the fastest goal ever scored in an FA Cup final. After that, the United fans were forced to wait with bated breath for a response. And in the 33rd minute, their patience was rewarded when Bruno Fernandes took to the penalty spot and made it count. In the end, a second goal from City's captain clinched a win for the Manchester Blues.
I'm absolutely elated. 2 out of 3. We're going to do the treble. We're going to take it from them after a whole history of hurt.
We expected a tight game, but yeah, absolutely fantastic. Best day ever.
We deserved it. First goal, 13 seconds, 15 seconds. You know, I've just lost for words.
A disappointment for the United fans yesterday, but there were still some positives to be taken away.
I'm good, but I'm proud of him. I think they did really well.
I think we could do more tackling in this season. But in next season, we might get some new players to do better.
Overall, I think a good season, and next season, title challenge again.
It was two titans of the game that went head-to-head yesterday, but ultimately it was Pep Guardiola's Manchester City that came out victorious. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Manchester City, on our way to Istanbul.
On our way to Istanbul, there we are. Well, coming up, something very exciting. In celebration of National Fish and Chips Day, I'll be speaking to the owner of London's oldest fish and chip shop. They still use their 152-year-old recipe to serve up the best catch. You won't want to miss it. See you soon.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
women. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. Earlier this weekend, it was National Fish and Chips Day. Well, my next guests know their business better than most, as are the owners of London's oldest fish and chip shop, Rock and Soul Place. It was founded during the Industrial Revolution in 1871, and the shop has incredibly survived for over 150 years, seeing prosperity and scarcity and even relentless bombings during the Second World War. Well, I'm joined now by brothers Ali and Ahmed Adin, I hope I said that right, to tell the story of their wonderful shop and this wonderful array of fish and chips.
Hello, Arlene.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in, and tell us what you've got here today.
Today we've bought the main staples of fish and chips. In the first box we have haddock.
Yes.
In the second box we have cod, and this one with the bone in the middle there is rock.
Yeah.
Followed by skate, wing, and then plaice.
Beautiful.
And these are the main staples of fish and chips.
Everybody watching at home will be about to have their lunch and they'll be looking at this and thinking, how did she manage to get two men to bring in her lunch like this? But in any event, you've been in the business since the 1980s, am I right?
Yes.
That's when your family took over the business.
That's right. Father, our dad and mum purchased the shop literally January 1980, and for 43 years we've been the custodians. We don't see ourselves as the owners. We're just looking after a piece of national heritage until we hand it over to the next people who are going to see that duty through.
Yeah, and Ali, you've been in the business since you were 6, you were telling me.
Yeah, well, when Dad took over, I was 6, my brother was 10.
Yeah.
And he started learning to cook at 10. I was in the basement doing spuds and the washing. And then at 10, 11, I was brought upstairs as well to start learning cooking.
Yeah, wonderful. And now you're both in the business now. Are any members of your family in the business as well?
My wife is now.
Yes.
And Mum and Dad retired a few years back.
Yeah.
So.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And I'm just going to show this to the camera so that we can see it's not just beautiful. I am really looking forward to the end of this show so that I can dig into all of this. But National Fish and Chip Day, do you think that's an important day to highlight the fact that you have traditional fish and chip shops all across the UK?
Absolutely, because fish and chips is a very special industry.
Mm.
You know, how can I say, it's been with the British public through thick and thin every time, and it's never let down the public. So the industry now needs a little bit of help back from the public.
Yeah.
You know, it's for many years until the advent of many other new cuisines. The chip shop was a central part of the community. People used to meet there on a Friday, and there'd be queues, and people would talk about what had gone on through their week and meet friends that they hadn't seen. And it was a central point. And these family businesses interacted with their communities and were integral to everything that was happening in them.
Well, it's so funny you say that because I have fabulous memories of going to visit my grandmother in Belfast, and all the cousins would sit along the hall and eat fish and chips from the local fish and chip shop, and that's how we met our cousins from Belfast, and it was a fabulous memory to have. But, I mean, fish has got quite expensive, hasn't it? And you were saying to me beforehand that the price of potatoes has rocketed as well. That puts a real pressure on you guys.
You know, everywhere's had a massive increase this year. But when you're dealing with two key elements, two key ingredients, and they are moving skyward every given day, since the beginning in 12 months, the potatoes, they generally follow, the products follow a similar trajectory year on year as they start where there's enough supply and the prices are low, and then it follows an increase throughout the year as the potatoes become rarer and stock diminishes. Usually it will increase from around about £6 to around £14 by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But this year, just in this last week, we've had an increase of 25%. So it's went from £20 to 25.
Gracious.
They're talking about next week £30. So in the space of 2 weeks, you're talking about a 50% increase.
Yeah.
So the struggle that a lot of the chip shops have is we do not, as individuals, have a purchasing power to negotiate with suppliers. So when you have these price fluctuations, it's very hard to keep a price structure that's consistent for the customers.
Yeah.
And one finds that in fish and chips, it's one of these bench points where people reference what they feel they should be paying, and hark back to the days I remember when I used to pay 5p for a bag of chips, or well, those days are never going to come back. But we have to be realistic and look at the spiralling costs and the fuel energy problem that we have.
Yeah.
So a lot of shops, this is our national dish, and our industry needs assistance both from the public and I believe from the government. We have a situation, for example, a few years ago, Greggs was able to achieve the rebate dispensation on pasty tax.
Yes, remember that.
And there was a big thing, and because the cost of the pasties was going to exceed what the public were willing to pay. So one of the biggest factors as well for any fish and chip shop is, aside from the varying and increasing costs, is the VAT and tax aspects exerted on the business. So if assistance doesn't arrive, there will be a massive attrition in this industry, and it will be very sad to see one of our national identities get put into such a crisis situation.
It would be devastating. And so, obviously, spiralling energy costs would have hit you hard. The price of potatoes, the fish, the price of that. You've had to put up your prices, presumably, Ali, have you?
We have, but we hate doing it.
Yeah, I know.
Because we know, how can I say, it's such a stable part of the British public.
Price perception.
There's a price perception, and, you know, we don't want to go too close to what people find unacceptable, because then you lose customers, but you can't work for free either.
Yeah.
So
No.
We've seen a lot of other operators actually go into bankruptcy because they felt they couldn't increase the price asked to the customers and thought they could weather the storm, and actually became victims to a situation that really shouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. It is a cultural piece of ours, and we must hold on to it, absolutely. And for all of us with happy memories of our childhood of eating fish and chips, it's very important that you guys continue. So huge thanks for coming in
today.
Thank you
very much for having us.
Don't be taking it too far away, because I think when I'm off air, I'll be certainly going to taste all of that. But coming up just after me is Emily Carver. So what have you got lined up on your show today, Emily?
It is indeed. Well, we're going to be having the very latest political news from Westminster. I also want to know what people think about Rishi Sunak. He's apparently given $3 million to his college in Stanford. I wonder whether people think that's on. He is the British Prime Minister. Should he have given that to a British university? Also, I'm going to be having a bit of a fiery debate, I think. I've got a spokesperson from Animal Rising, the activist group which disrupted the Epsom Derby yesterday, and also someone who works in the horse racing industry. So we're going to be getting their views. I think it's an important debate to have, myself, actually, because I think there's going to be more and more of this type of disruption. Does horse racing need to change? They've changed before. What do people at home think? I know a lot of our viewers care deeply about animal rights, but also don't like the way these activists just take it upon themselves to disrupt things that other people enjoy simply because they don't approve.
Well, I'm sure Rishi Sunak's constituents will be interested to hear that he gave a huge amount of money to a school in America, whilst schools here are still struggling, Emily. That's something I'm sure that our GB viewers and listeners will want to have their voice heard on, and I've no doubt that they'll be getting in touch with you to make their voices heard. Thanks, Emily, and have a great show.
Thank you.
So I just want to thank all of my guests, particularly my guests from the Fish and Chip Shop, as you would expect me to. And Michael will be back next week. Goodbye.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got increasing amounts of cloud through tonight, but it will mean another dry day on Monday as that burns away and high pressure really is around for the next few days. It is controlling our weather, keeping it dry and largely settled, though it will be quite breezy at times across some eastern coasts and the southeast in particular. So through the rest of Sunday into the evening time, we can see a fine end to the day for many, but this low cloud in the North Sea is already rolling back into eastern areas, and overnight it pushes southwestwards, reaching as far south and west as parts of East Wales and the West Country. Clearer skies further west, here turning quite chilly, temperatures dipping largely into single figures in the countryside, towns and cities holding up a little higher. So west-east split for Monday morning, sunshine from the word go across western parts of the UK. Further east it is cloudy, and this cloud will hang around for much of the morning, but it slowly lifts and breaks, and by the time we get to the afternoon it will largely affect eastern counties of England and eastern parts of Scotland. An isolated shower possible in Northern Ireland and Scotland, but most places dry with sunshine. Temperatures a little lower compared to the weekend, but still reaching